Chapter 5. The Hunt. The haunting began the next day. Anttias was in the great hall, suffering through breakfast and a particularly tedious conversation with Lady Marguerite about her father's opinions on crop rotation, when the Jester appeared. Literally appeared. One moment the bench beside him was empty, the next bells were chiming and Painted Face was grinning up at him from approximately 6 inches away. "Good morning, Your Grace." Anttias nearly dropped his bread. "Gods, don't do that." "Do what?" the Jester blinked innocently. "Appear from nowhere like a spectre, ghost, manifestation of your guilty conscience." I was going to say nuisance. That too. The Jester hopped up onto the table, actually onto the table, scattering bread rolls, and addressed Lady Marguerite with a sweeping bow. "My lady, you are speaking to one of the finest knights in the north. Skilled, brave, deadly with a blade." Lady Marguerite looked startled. Anttias felt his ears heat. "I wouldn't say modest too. But false modesty, my lady, is still falsehood. This man could best any opponent in single combat. Probably 2 opponents. Maybe 3 if they were drunk. That's not... And handsome. Look at that jawline. You could cut cheese on that jaw. Sharp cheese. The expensive kind." Anttias grabbed for the Jester, who tumbled backward off the table in a cascade of bells, landed in a crouch, and somehow ended up perched on Anttias's knee like an overgrown parrot. "He's also terribly strong," the Jester continued, completely unbothered. "Feel those shoulders, my lady. Go on. Very solid. I am not. Get off. And his swordsmanship. Unparalleled. Well, mostly unparalleled. There was that one time a mysterious guard put him on his back in 3 moves, but we don't talk about that." Anttias froze. The Jester's painted face showed nothing. Half smile, half frown. Completely unreadable. Lady Marguerite was staring at both of them with the expression of someone reconsidering her breakfast choices. "I should go," she said faintly. She fled. The Jester hopped off Anttias's lap and sketched a bow. "You're welcome." "For what? Terrifying a perfectly nice lady?" "For advertising your virtues. How else will anyone know you're available for marriage if I don't shout about it?" I don't want..." But the Jester was already gone, bells fading down the corridor, leaving Anttias sitting alone at the table wondering what had just happened. It continued. Every social function, every meal, every God's damned moment Anttias spent in public, the Jester was there, praising him, to everyone, in the most embarrassing ways possible. "Abs like armour, my lady, I've seen them. Could definitely win a fight against a bear." And his thighs. Have you noticed his thighs? Anttias wanted to die, but worse, or maybe better, the Jester never laughed. Not once. Every ridiculous pronouncement was delivered with complete sincerity, Painted Face solemn, bells chiming softly, which somehow made it funnier. People started laughing. At the Jester, at Anttias, at the whole absurd spectacle of a painted Jester sitting in a prince's lap and earnestly extolling the virtues of his thighs to scandalize noblewomen. And Anttias tolerated it, because every time it happened he was scanning the room, searching faces, looking for her, hoping desperately that she was there, somewhere, listening, hearing the Jester's ridiculous praise and thinking maybe, possibly, there was something worth noticing about the knight with the allegedly impressive jawline. He never saw her. Finally, one night after the Jester had cornered 3 different ladies and described Anttias's warrior's hands in excruciating detail, and he had won a silly arm wrestling contest the Jester had arranged against a minor lord, Anttias felt exhausted. He walked through the castle gardens just to clear his head. And there she was, standing by the fountain, brown hair loose around her shoulders, wearing a simple green dress that made her look like part of the garden itself. Completely still, watching him. Anttias's heart stopped. "You?" She smiled, said nothing, turned and walked away into the shadows. He followed, Of course he followed, but she was gone, vanished between one breath and the next. On the fountain's edge, where she'd been standing, lay a handkerchief, cream-coloured, embroidered with a small pattern of leaves. Anttias picked it up like it was made of spun glass. Real. She was real. The pattern emerged over the next few weeks. When Anttias won something, anything, he would see her. A sparring match earned him a glimpse in the corridor that evening. She'd been wearing blue, gone before he could speak. A strategic debate with his grandfather's advisors. He'd argued persuasively for adjusting grain tariffs, of all the tedious things. And that night she'd been in the library, had looked up from a book, smiled, disappeared between the shelves. Once Lord Hurrick had bet him 5 silver he couldn't hit the centre of the archery target from 50 paces in high wind. Anttias, who was a mediocre archer at best, had somehow managed it. That evening she'd been at a tavern in the city, the same tavern he'd gone to for a quiet drink. She'd been sitting in the corner wearing a burgundy dress, and she'd raised her cup to him in silent salute before melting into the crowd. The morning he'd beaten the king at chess, an actual miracle his grandfather played chess like other men waged war, Anttias had been deemed worthy to have a ribbon tied to his wrist. Deep green, silk. A minor bet with the Jester about whether he could climb the East Tower without using the stairs. He'd done it, showed up to dinner with scraped palms and the Jester's grudging respect. That night, she had smiled at him in a moonlit corridor when he was on his way to the loo. She'd tucked a flower in his hair and disappeared. He won a debate about water rights with 3 of his grandfather's most pedantic advisors. Found her in the gardens the next morning, early when the dew was still on the grass. She never spoke during these glimpses, just watched, smiled, left. And always, she left something behind. A ribbon, a pressed flower, a small wooden token carved with an oak leaf. Once, inexplicably, a perfect white stone from the river. Anttias collected them like a miser collected gold, hid them in a small box in his chambers, took them out sometimes late at night, and tried to understand the pattern. Tried to understand her. She was rewarding him. He knew that much. Every achievement earned a glimpse. Every victory bought a moment of her attention. It should have annoyed him. Should have felt manipulative. It felt safe instead. As if her ghostly nature meant he could never get too close to her. A game without the risk of becoming too real. It made him train harder than he'd ever trained in his life. The practice yard became his second home. He drilled footwork until his legs shook, ran the castle walls at dawn, spent hours in the armory, conditioning, strengthening, perfecting. He started accepting every bet, every challenge, every opportunity to prove himself. Lord Corwin wanted to race horses. Anttias won by half a length and found a blue ribbon on his saddle afterward. The guards challenged him to an arm wrestling contest. He beat 7 of them and saw her watching from a doorway gone before he could stand. The lakes were forgotten. Going home was forgotten. His lady was here, and he was going to be worthy of her. 6 weeks before the tournament, she spoke to him. He'd won a sparring match against 3 opponents. Exhausting, brutal, but he'd managed it. Barely. He was sitting on a bench in the practice yard, trying to convince his lungs to remember how breathing worked when she appeared. Not just a glimpse this time. Actually walked up, sat down beside him. You're improving. Anttias's brain short-circuited. Thank you. Your footwork is less drunk cart horse, more sober cart horse. He laughed. Couldn't help it. High praise. I'm very discerning. She tilted her head. You've been working hard. I have a score to settle. Do you? With a certain guard who insulted my technique and fled like a thief. Maybe she had somewhere to be. Maybe she was afraid I'd demand a rematch. She smiled. Terrified, obviously. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Anttias was hyper-aware of her presence, the way she sat easy and unself-conscious, the way she smelled faintly of something herbal, sage maybe. The tournament, she said, you're entering. Yes. Planning to win. Planning to try. She stood, brushed dust from her skirt. Win well enough, maybe I'll attend your victory celebration. His heart jumped. You'll be there? Maybe, if you're impressive enough. She grinned. Better work on that overhead strike, you're still telegraphing it. And she was gone. Anttias sat there for a long moment, staring at the space where she'd been. Then he stood, grabbed his practice sword, and got back to work. The months passed in a blur of training and glimpses, and the Jester's relentless, mortifying campaign to advertise Anttias's virtues to every woman at court. The worst, the absolute worst, was the day the Jester had climbed into his lap during a formal dinner and loudly informed the Duchess of Westmarch that Anttias had excellent child-making hips, my lady, very sturdy, good for producing heirs. Anttias had wanted to sink through the floor. The Duchess had laughed so hard she'd choked on her wine. He kept looking for excuses to win things, anything. Better stable hand, he could muck 10 stalls faster. Won. Saw her in the courtyard that evening, challenged the cook to identify wines blindfolded. Lost the first round, won the second. She handed him a cork from an expensive vintage in passing in the empty castle courtyard the next morning. Accepted every sparring invitation, every race, every stupid challenge the young lords threw at him. And she was always there. Somewhere. Watching. Rewarding him with glimpses, with tokens, with the knowledge that someone was paying attention. It was intoxicating. Yvonne sat in her small room, bells discarded, paint washed off, staring at her hands. This was supposed to be amusing. It had been amusing. Watching Anttias squirm while the Jester praised his thighs. Watching him scan rooms desperately for a glimpse of the mystery woman. Watching him collect tokens like they were holy relics and train himself into exhaustion for a few words of approval. Watching him accept increasingly ridiculous challenges just for the chance she might appear. It was funny. It was working. She'd learned things. Important things. The way he reacted to praise. Embarrassed but pleased. The way he worked harder when he thought someone was watching. The way he kept everyone at arm's length, except when he thought she was near. The way he was earnest and honest and a little bit ridiculous and completely, genuinely good. Damn him. Yvonne pulled her knees up, wrapped her arms around them. She liked him. Not as a target. Not as a puzzle to solve for the king's entertainment. She just liked him. His dedication, his humour. The way he tolerated the Jester's antics without complaint because he hoped his lady was listening. The way he'd thanked her for calling his footwork sober cart horse-like as if it was the finest compliment he'd ever received. The way he'd mucked stables, actually mucked stables a night, on a bet with a stable hand, and looked so absurdly pleased with himself when he'd won. This was a problem. This was a very large problem. The king wanted information, wanted to know why Anttias couldn't be seduced, wanted Yvonne to dig until she found the fear or whatever kept the boy from letting anyone close. And Yvonne was starting to suspect she already knew. The way he looked at her, like she was precious, fragile, like he was afraid she'd disappear if he reached for her too quickly. The way he kept distance even while desperately craving closeness. The way he talked about settling scores instead of courtship, like romance was dangerous and combat was safer. There was a wound there, old, deep, still raw, and Yvonne was going to have to cut into it to satisfy the king's curiosity. Unless she stopped. Unless she told the king this was too much, too cruel, that his grandson was fine, just cautious, and pushing harder would only break something that was already cracked. And yet, she did not want to stop. Not because she wanted to hurt Anttias, because for the first time in her life, someone was looking for her in the mass of faces. Looking at her like she mattered, not like she was background noise or a thing to be used. The bells sat on her table, bright, cheerful, mocking. Yvonne looked at them, looked away. Tomorrow was the spring festival. The tournament would begin. Anttias would compete. and she'd promised, implied, hinted, dangled like bait, that if he won, she'd attend his celebration. Yvonne lay back on her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. This was supposed to be fun. It had stopped being fun when he'd smiled at her in the practice yard, like it was a title worth earning when she had said, "sober cart horse." When he'd won a bet about climbing the tower and shown up with scraped, bleeding palms, and looked so genuinely happy to see her in that moonlit hallway. When he'd started seeking out challenges, any challenges, just for the chance she might notice. Damn him, damn the king, damn herself for agreeing to this. The spring festival arrived with trumpets and banners and Yvonne's growing certainty that she was in trouble. But it was too late to stop now. She picked up the bells, put on the paint, and went to prepare for the festival. Chapter 6. The Victor. The tournament lasted 3 days. 3 days of crowds and trumpets and the Jester appearing at the worst possible moments to shout things like, "Notice his grip! Very firm! Useful in many contexts." Anttias wanted to die, but he also wanted to win. So he won. Day 1, sword fighting. 8 matches, each harder than the last. His footwork held. The overhead strike, no longer telegraphed, "Thank you very much," landed clean. He put Sir Garrett on his back in the finals and the crowd roared. The Jester had cartwheeled across the arena. "Did you see that? Poetry! Violence as art! He's available for marriage, ladies!" Anttias had ignored him, scanned the crowd instead, searched for brown hair, a green dress, anything, nothing. Day 2. Archery. His weakest event. He knew it. Everyone knew it. The Jester had loudly proclaimed that even his failures are handsome, which somehow made it worse. He placed 3rd, respectable, not winning. That night, no glimpse, no token. He'd expected that. Earned it even. Day 3. Jousting. Anttias was good at jousting. The horse did half the work and he had excellent balance and a decent lance arm. 4 passes, 4 victories. The final match against Lord Matten went to 7 passes before Anttias finally unseated him. The crowd went wild. The Jester had somehow gotten hold of a trumpet and was playing a victory march. Badly, enthusiastically. Anttias accepted the honours. The crown of oak leaves, the ceremonial sword, useless for actual combat, beautiful to look at. The purse of gold. Lady Ashford presented the prizes, smiled, suggested he might visit her family's estate sometime. He smiled back, said something polite, forgot it immediately. Because he was scanning the crowd again. Still nothing. The celebration moved to the largest tavern in the city, the Golden Stag, 3 stories of noise and drink, and people who wanted to congratulate him, or bet on him, or just touch the victor's sleeve for luck. Anttias accepted a cup of wine, let himself be pulled into conversations, laughed at jokes he didn't hear, and kept looking. An hour passed, then 2. She wasn't coming. He'd won, mostly won, 3rd in archery but 1st overall, and she wasn't coming. Maybe she'd decided he wasn't impressive enough. Maybe the archery had disappointed her. Maybe. Congratulations. He turned. She was there, standing at his elbow like she'd materialized from smoke, brown hair loose and slightly wild, wearing a dress he'd never seen before, deep red, simple, the kind common girls wore to festivals when they wanted to look pretty without pretending to be nobles. She looked beautiful. "You came," he said. Eloquent, brilliant. Definitely the speech of a man who just won a tournament. "You won," she smiled. "Mostly. Archery isn't your strong suit, I noticed." She glanced at the crowd, at the press of bodies and noise. "This is very loud. We could go somewhere quieter, find a corner, leave entirely." But she was already moving. Not away. Closer. She slipped through the crowd like water and somehow ended up at the table where he'd been sitting. Someone had vacated the chair beside him, or maybe she'd convinced them to vacate it. Either way, there was space. She sat. Anttias sat, stared at her. "Wine?" she asked, reaching for the pitcher. Yes, she poured, handed him a cup, poured one for herself. They drank. The tavern roared around them. Anttias heard none of it. You worked hard, she said. I had motivation. Did you? A lady suggested she might attend my celebration if I was impressive enough. And were you? Impressive? You're here. I guess that answers it. She laughed. Soft, warm. The sound did something complicated to his chest. You're here, he said again, quieter. I thought maybe you'd decided. That third place in archery was disqualifying. Something like that. It was close. She tilted her head. But I'm merciful. Sometimes. Someone jostled the table. The crowd was getting rowdier, more drunk, more celebratory. She shifted closer, to hear better probably, to avoid being elbowed by the lords behind her. Her shoulder pressed against his. Anttias stopped breathing. You're tense, she observed. I'm not. You are. Here. She reached for the platter of food someone had brought. Cheese, bread, roasted meat. Picked up something and held it out. Eat. Victors need sustenance. He ate. She fed him 3 more pieces, utterly unself-conscious, like this was normal, like sitting beside a strange knight and feeding him cheese was something she did every day. Maybe she did. He didn't know anything about her. Your name, he said. Please, I need to know your name. She smiled, leaned closer. Her breath was warm against his ear. Win at midsummer, then I'll tell you my name. That's months away. She pulled back. Not far, just enough to look at him. Gods, she had bright eyes, sharp, clever, amused. He was staring, he knew he was staring, couldn't stop. Someone called his name, Lord something or other, wanting to toast the victor. Anttias raised his cup, drank. She was still there when he looked back, still smiling. You're very determined, she said. You make me determined. Good. The evening blurred. More wine, more food, more people congratulating him, and he responded automatically because she was there, right there, within reach. At some point, he wasn't sure when, she ended up in his lap. It might have been the crowd, the press of bodies, the lack of space. It might have been intentional. He didn't care. She was warm and solid and real, and she was in his lap, and his brain had stopped forming coherent thoughts somewhere around the moment her weight had settled against him. Is this acceptable? She asked. Quiet. Just for him. Yes. It came out hoarse. She grinned, reached for the wine, poured his cup full, held it to his lips. He drank. She drank from the same cup. Set it down. Picked up a piece of bread. Fed him, fed herself. Leaned back against his shoulder like this was perfectly normal. Like tavern girls sat in victorious knights' laps all the time and it meant nothing. It meant everything. Anttias was aware, distantly, through the wine and the warmth and the sheer overwhelming reality of her, that he should probably be more careful. People were watching. He didn't care, and let them watch. She turned her head, looked at him. They were very close. You fought well today, she said softly. Thank you. The overhead strike was perfect. You noticed? I notice everything about you. His heart stopped. Do you? She reached up, traced the line of his jaw with one finger. You're very easy to notice. You're one to talk. Am I? I've been looking for you for months. You're all I see. She smiled. Good. And kissed him. It wasn't soft, wasn't tentative. She kissed like she fought, direct, confident, leaving no room for doubt. Anttias forgot how to breathe, forgot the tavern, the crowd, the noise. There was only her. Her mouth, the weight of her in his lap, the way her hand curled against his neck. When she pulled back, he chased her. Couldn't help it. She laughed, soft, delighted, eager. You have no idea. I might have some idea, she shifted in his lap. Definitely intentional, showing him exactly how much of an idea she had. Her smile turned wicked. "Patience," she whispered against his mouth. "Win at midsummer. I'll tell you my name. That's all you are getting at midsummer. Win at harvest festival too. And we will see what you will get then. I'll win. I know you will." She kissed him again. Longer this time. Deeper. Her fingers tangled in his hair, and Anttias stopped thinking entirely. The tavern celebration went late. Very late. Anttias lost track of time somewhere between the third kiss and the moment she bit his lower lip gently, and he made a sound he'd probably be embarrassed about later. She stayed in his lap, fed him, poured him wine, kissed him when the crowd wasn't looking, kissed him when they were. He was aware dimly that this was probably scandalous, that people would talk. He dismissed it. He was a victor. He was allowed indulgence. And she was everything. Sometime deep in the night, when the crowd had thinned and the candles were burning low, she leaned close, kissed the side of his neck, lingered there. He felt her teeth. Gentle, then not gentle. "Something to remember me by," she murmured. Then she was gone, between one heartbeat and the next, slipped from his lap and melted into the shadows and disappeared before he could stop her. Anttias sat there, wine-drunk and dizzy and aching, touched his neck where she'd bitten, felt the raised skin, the mark. A token. He started laughing. Couldn't stop. All those ribbons, all those pressed flowers, all those careful, delicate gifts. And now she'd left him a bruise. Gods, he was in love with her. Yvonne made it back to the castle as dawn was breaking. She slipped through the servants' entrance, up the back stairs, into her small room, closed the door, leaned against it, and tried very hard not to think about what she'd just done. It had been supposed to be controlled, calculated. Another glimpse, maybe a conversation reinforcing the pattern, keeping him hooked. She'd lost control somewhere around the second cup of wine, or maybe the first kiss, or maybe the moment he'd looked at her like she was the only person in the entire tavern and said, "You're all I see." Damn him. Yvonne pressed her hands to her face. She'd sat in his lap, fed him, kissed him, multiple times, in public. Felt the proof of exactly how functional he was pressed against her thigh for most of the night, hard and insistent, and she deliberately shifted against it just to hear the sound he made. She was supposed to be investigating, learning, reporting back to the king. Instead, she'd wanted him. Not as a target, not as a puzzle. Just wanted. Wanted his attention, his focus, the way he looked at her like she was precious and dangerous and fascinating all at once. Wanted to keep that feeling, hoard it, hide it away where no one could take it. For the first time in her life, someone had looked for her, searched for her, seen her as something more than background noise or a useful tool. And gods, the king would ask, he always asked, and she always told the truth. That was the arrangement. That was how this worked. But she didn't want to tell him about this, about the tavern, about Anttias's hands careful on her waist, and the way he'd kissed her like she was air and he was drowning, about the evidence pressed against her thigh that proved, definitively, that there was nothing wrong with him physically, that whatever kept him from pursuing women, it wasn't a lack of interest. She wanted to keep it, all of it, just for herself. She couldn't. The man was a prince. He was watched, and the king would ask. All she could hope was that he wouldn't ask the questions she didn't know how to answer, like what she was feeling, like whether she was still playing a game or whether the game was now playing her. Yvonne pushed away from the door, went to the basin, washed her face, took off the red dress, common, cheap, perfect for a tavern girl with loose morals and no name, put on her jester's motley, the bells, the paint, became no one again. Outside, the castle was waking. The festival would continue today. More celebrations, more performances. The jester would be expected to appear, to entertain, to mock and jest and be harmless. Yvonne picked up her bells and tried very hard not to think about the way Anttias had whispered, "You're all I see," like it was a prayer, or the way she'd believed him.